7 sessions over 2 days of webinars of our contributions, and this year's symposium has been organised by the Salford team and the Cycling Society Research Group Committee. It's great to see so many people here. It's great to see an international mix. It's going to be a bit different, but we've tried to make it nice and interactive so we get some meaningful discussion. Hopefully you've all had a chance to see the online library of contributions that people have made. So that's our kind of presentations and papers. So by keeping them separate, that's a way for us to reserve this hour for discussion and reflection on those. This is Blackboard. I don't know if people are familiar with it. This is an online system for teaching and for seminars and meetings. A few things to say, just that as participants, you'll be muted and your cameras won't be working. We will later on, when we do Q&A, be able to unmute people to ask questions. But what you should be seeing when I take the slide down is the faces of the panelists and me, and we'll have our microphones on. You should, if there's any issues with sound or anything, please do just let us know in the chat function, which is in the, you should see it in the bottom right hand side of the window. You'll see a chat function and you can chat to everyone and just raise any issues. We have people in the team who are just keeping an eye on that sort of thing to make sure nothing goes wrong. The chat function is also there for you to ask questions or to make points, so it's a discussion. If it's a question, it'd be really good if you could put the letter Q at the beginning, so I know to look out for it as a question. And also, if it's for a particular panelist, please put their name in it as well. But you're welcome to ask questions either to a particular panelist or to the whole panel. And I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves shortly. So that's our session for today. The program for the 2 days is on their website and it's on the screen here now. So basically what we've done is taken all of the various contributions that people generously sent and have put them into different themes. And then our final session tomorrow afternoon is some guest speakers who will reflect across the different things they've heard during the 2 days. And we're also going to have a social on Zoom this evening. And details of that will follow if you just keep an eye out for emails from us or Eventbrite for that. Other things to say just at the moment are the hashtag is C8S2020, and I think that will do for, yeah, thanks. I've just seen Sam saying on the programme, it's very helpful. There's a link to the programme. I think that's the technical stuff I need to go through. So yeah, I'm sure stuff will come up as we go on, but I'll mention it then. So this session is about the COVID context. We had quite a few presentations on this, and yes, thanks. Just to clarify, there's no slides in this session. There's just this one information screen, and then we'll see the panelists shortly. So COVID has been a context for all our lives for the last 6 months or so. For many during lockdown, cycling stopped being a kind of regular commute, certainly for me anyway, because I began working from home and have been since. So it stopped being a regular commute for me, but it became a part of my life in a different way, and for many people as well. It became a form of exercise more than commuting, something to do for fun. And actually, we saw certainly in the UK and beyond, we saw people taking up walking and cycling for exercise as a way of taking a break during lockdown. And there's some signs that has made cycling more inclusive, more people getting involved. And one factor of that was we had quieter streets because we were locked down. And walking and cycling also became a useful alternative to public transport for those who were not able to use public transport or were concerned about the disease spreading on public transport. And at the same time, there was evidence mounting that air quality could be linked to COVID-19, and therefore there was a public policy interest in supporting people to walk and cycle more. And we saw new temporary infrastructure, local and national investment, and as we'll hear in some of the discussion today, and in one of the papers on the library, on the online library, a kind of try it and see approach. We've seen that near me in Greater Manchester and elsewhere, trying new temporary infrastructure to see how it works. So I won't say that we're now normal, because we're far from normal at the moment in terms of our lives, but we have seen traffic levels increasing again as some areas of society open up, and I think that quieter period has certainly for me has stopped, and we're seeing heavier levels of traffic again now. So it's interesting to see how cycling now fits in with this current situation. So after that context, I'd like to ask panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to take this screen down so you can see us all. And I should also say that we're recording these sessions and they'll be made available to participants afterwards. The other thing I wanted to just quickly say was in Blackboard, you'll be getting notifications when people add something on the chat, and I hope people will add stuff on the chat. It's meant to be an interactive session, but you may get a kind of annoying beep or something. If you want to stop that, you can go to the kind of wheel in the bottom right-hand corner for settings, and then there's an option for notification settings, and you can turn off audio notification in there. Right. I'm just going to attempt to turn off this slide. Good. So I'd like to welcome the 4 presenters. Unfortunately, our 5th presenter, Jane, has had to give her apologies for family reasons, but we're joined by Margot, Dave, Nigel, and Andreas, who I think you can see on the screen. I'd like to give each of the panelists a chance to introduce themselves now. This is a fairly brief introduction, but name, affiliation, and some key points from your presentation. So I'm not asking you to do your presentation again, just some key points so we can all remember from all the many presentations that we viewed in the last few days. So I don't know what order you can see yourselves on the screen, so let's start with Margot.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me?
Yep. Yes, hi Margot.
Hi, so my name is Margot Abord-de-Chatillon, and I am a PhD researcher at the University of Lyon in France. And yes, name, affiliation, and my presentation was about COVID-related cycling subsidies, and more specifically one that is called the coup de pouce vélo, and that is related to bicycle repair, so a subsidy for bicycle repair. And my point was that that little 50 euro subsidy that was implemented by the French government changed a lot of things in the bicycle repair ecosystem in France. Yes, so that's it.
Thank you, Margot, and we'll come back to that in the discussion, I'm sure. Who's next? Dave. Dave, please.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm cutting out every so often. Hopefully I'm okay at this minute. I'm from Spokes, the Lothian Cycle Campaign, which is a campaign group in Edinburgh and the Lothians in Scotland. We've got over 1,000 members. We've been going since the last century. And we've seen cycle use rise from 1% of commuting to about 7%. So we've still a long way to go, but we've kind of moved slightly. So my paper, Edinburgh, I don't know how typical this is of cities around, but implementation of cycle projects very, very slow. My paper lists 4 major projects in Edinburgh which were initiated between 5 and 10 years ago, and yet nothing has appeared on the ground. So the ideas are there, the money's there, but the citizens are not reaping the benefit of these schemes because they're just not implemented. Now, the COVID experience has shown a completely new situation. And once the government altered the regulations to allow COVID street schemes to be implemented, Edinburgh suddenly started. We had 5 road closures within a couple of days. We've had 5 kilometers of segregated cycleway within a few weeks, and we're promised 35 kilometers within a couple of months. So my paper then tries to find a way of combining these two approaches such that we get much quicker implementation, but we still have a reasonable amount of consultation. Because obviously the big problem with the COVID schemes is there's a lot of complaints about not enough consultation. So that's a very brief summary.
Thank you, Dave. And who's next? Andreas, please.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for hosting and for having us here. My name is Andreas Santos. I am a PhD student at the University of Liverpool, researching urban cycling and cycling policy. And the basis of my contribution came from a field trip I took just before the lockdown to the cities of Delft and Ghent. We went there to explore how the cities managed to make cycling feel kind of natural, normal. Of course, normal is subjective, but they made cycling into an activity which doesn't really require much thought or much effort. And fast forward a few months, now those lessons are more relevant than ever with COVID-19 disrupting what is considered to be normal life here in the UK. So with the publication of Gear, Chain and Ball Vision for Walking and Cycling, my contribution seeks to the lessons from these cities in order to see how we can implement them and create a better normal for UK cities now in a kind of post-COVID world.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nigel.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Checking that. Okay. So my name's Nigel Dykes. I'm a lecturer at the University of Cumbria. I run a course called Outdoor Adventure and Environmental Studies. My talk was about commuting. That's really my contribution. I guess it was kind of my experience of being a commuter when suddenly I'm put back into my own home to work from it, and commuting seemingly had no particular place, particularly to get to work. So it's sort of just a series of reflections and questions about that experience and what I was getting from the actual lack of commuting in a sense. And I guess what I found is similar to what Graham had said at the beginning there, was that I sort of had to find a place for it. I find that commuting is kind of this transitional world between work and home, and it gives you this sort of space and time where you transition going to work and coming home from work, and that really gives you a great sort of change. So you arrive at home and you're completely refreshed. So I kind of lacked that, and also I had this latent energy in my body because I cycle quite a long way. My commute's 38 miles there and back. And so not doing that, suddenly your body is conditioned to do all that exercise, and suddenly you're sat around and going, got all this energy, I suppose. I'm kind of interested in the idea of how movement shapes our environment. I'm an ecologist, and that's a real fascination for me, and equally about our sort of idea of time and how we spend that. And commuting obviously has all sorts of connotations for saving time, but I'm actually spending more time commuting, so it's kind of interesting to look at this concept of time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I remember thinking your commute looked a bit more scenic than my quick hop across Salford. I can imagine you might actually miss it. Although I miss mine as well, to be honest. So thanks all of you for the very interesting presentations you submitted to and they're on the website, and for coming here today to discuss this. I'd encourage everyone to type in questions or thoughts into the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. If you address it, so it will give you a choice to an individual or to everyone. If you put it to everyone, then we all see those questions. I'd like to open with a question, if I may, and that is really how. So are we seeing? I think we are. We've seen a kind of boom in cycling to some extent. How do we now move from what could be just a temporary boom? How do we move towards being that? I hate to use the phrase, but it's used a lot at the moment. How do we make that the new normal? I don't know if one person would like to go first, or I can.
May I? Yes. Well, I believe that I mean my research is about bicycle repair, right? And I think that's what's interesting about bicycle repair is that it's not the first thing you do when you start cycling, right? It's more likely to be something you do maybe a couple of weeks, a month, a couple of months after you've started cycling. And I think bicycle repair is a very good sector to invest in for people who want cyclists to remain cyclists and to become long-term cyclists, because this is all about maintaining your bicycle, maintaining your cycling practices as well. So that's the reason people usually think about bicycle repair later when they start thinking about cycling, and that's also the reason I believe it is something that that's the reason it was very surprising for me that the French government implemented bicycle repair policies, because to me it would not be the first thing anyone would think of, but it is the thing that can help people maintain cycling practices. So that was my little plug-in for this question.
Yeah, thank you. Any
I,
thoughts on that?
I can say something on this if you like.
Yes, please.
I think it's well accepted that safe and well infrastructure is pretty vital to get more people cycling and to encourage new continue. And so I think it's important for
Dave, I'm really sorry,
to engage with local
the
and
audio is
central
breaking up.
governments.
Dave, sorry, the audio is breaking up, I'm afraid, when you're speaking. I wonder if you turn your camera off, it might help the audio, if that's okay. Thanks. I'm hoping I'm hoping we can hear you now. If you can try, thank you.
You hear me now?
Yes, yeah, that's better.
Right, okay. I was saying infrastructure is really important for encouraging new people to start cycling and for maintaining existing cyclists. Therefore, it's very important for organizations to engage with central and local governments to try and ensure that infrastructure comes in. And my paper kind of shows some of the problems that councils and government are very keen on extensive consultations. You know, they consult on the principles, then they consult on an outline project, then they consult on more detailed projects. This is what we found in Edinburgh. So it can take 5 years or more before anything happens on the ground. So that's vital to rethink their procedures. And then in the case of Scotland, but this may be different elsewhere, the Scottish Government needs to change the rules for traffic orders, because at the moment, all the schemes that are being introduced under COVID are only there for 18 months. Then legally they have to be removed. But if the Scottish Government could change the traffic order rules to make it easier to convert temporary into permanent, then that would help local authorities a lot. But as I say, that's a Scottish issue. It may not be reflected in other parts of Britain or even in the world.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it will be interesting to hear from others about that. The audio is really good now, thanks. I think it works better like that. So in order to continue this boom, we need changes in regulation potentially. Yeah, any other thoughts?
I've got a thought here. Oh, sorry, do I go, Andrew?
No, it's okay. After you, Nigel.
Yeah, I guess there's an element of, to make this into the new normal, a lot of people cycling for leisure, and that transition to cycle for transport is quite a paradigm shift really for people, especially people who drive places and then go cycling. You know, the car's still very much part of that sort of experience of cycling. So I think that's a fundamental challenge. I mean, I can remember my dad's words, they ring in my ear. He gave me a bike when I was 8 and he said, "There you go, son, that's how you get around." And he wasn't kidding. So I guess it's in my blood, and I'm kind of that mindset, and sort of shifting people's mindset from a bike as being something that's a leisure experience to a bike that becomes something functional and a mode of transport is a modal shift for a lot of people. So there's a real challenge there in getting people to sort of think primarily bikers transport rather than bikers leisure, perhaps, because a lot of people cycling, awful lot of people cycling, but a lot of that is leisure cycling and not commuting, and so therefore we're just actually increasing the amount of traffic, not actually decreasing it by cycling sometimes. Just a thought.
Yeah, and I wonder how many people were cycling more because they could no longer go to a gym, for example. So that once gyms open up, or as they have in many places, that may stop being such an attraction. Andreas.
I feel like the first step has actually been made. So the lessons we see, especially from the city of Ghent in Belgium, where they wanted to implement a completely new kind of transport structure within their city, and they knew they had to do it fast and quick and cheaply in order for that to be kind of accepted by the people. So what they did is using just very temporary cheap material, everyday materials like red paint or planters or kind of street furniture. Within literally overnight, they just closed roads, and they created these new lanes, they created these new safe spaces. And I think this is something that Nigel picked up in his presentation as well. He said that at some point he started getting used to cycling on empty roads, and I think that that's key. So if you provide people with safe spaces, with spaces that make it easy for them and it doesn't require much thought or effort for them to actually get on a bike and get going to work or to the shops or anything like that, that starts to become the new normal. That starts to become kind of everyday life for them. So I think the key here is just perseverance. I mean, there will be a vocal minority. There will always be kind of a vocal minority against such measures. But if there is political willingness, I think we can overcome that and create this kind of better normal that that we discussed.
Thank you. Could I just come back quickly on that one? Yeah, I very much agree with what you said about implementing with cheap materials on a basis of try it and then modify it. That's certainly what's happening in Edinburgh. That's referred to in our paper quite a lot. But in your video, you talk about the UK government's gear change policy, which is a fantastic policy, I agree. But it does require very high standard of implementation, and it's talking about permanent schemes. It's not talking about this in try then modify business. And one point you do not mention in your paper is the amount of money allocated, because the UK government has only allocated 2 billion over 5 years, which works out at £7 per person per year, which is compared to European. So unless the money is used for low-cost try then modify schemes, it's not really going to go very far. Yes. So yeah, so basically I'm saying your approach of try then modify is great, but the way the gear change policy is coming in, it's not really aligned with that very well. Thank you.
I very much agree with. Sorry, can I?
Yes, please.
Can I make a rebuttal? I very much agree with what they've said. So in my presentation, talking about gear change, the message I'm trying to get across is not essentially that gear change is this kind of be all end all cycling policy paper that gives us all the solutions. It's just a kind of a first step. It's something better than what we've come to be used to in the UK in terms of cycling policy. So I very much agree with Dave that there is some serious work needed to be looked at in order to actually achieve the goals that gear change sets forth.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought the Ghent example was really interesting of just trying something and sticking with it and making sure it works. I'm going to come to some questions from the wider participants. So you'll be able to see these anyway. I can't read out everything, but let me start with a question which is for the whole panel. How can we convert people new to leisure cycling into people who are commuting or riding for utility post-COVID-19? Who would like to say something about
that? I can start if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of things there. I do agree that perhaps safe roads and things like that are really important. It's the experience of the cyclist that will perhaps keep them. You know, might do it once, but you need to be able to do it multiple times. And one other thing that I wondered that we perhaps need to address is when you go to work. Let's say if we're cycling in terms of commuting, I'm thinking from commute point of view. Is, well, what do you do with your bike when you arrive there, and what do you do with your body that's hot and sweaty when you arrive there, and what do you do with that set of clothing? So what facilities perhaps might the workplace be able to provide and offer? I'm lucky, I work for a university, we have showers and we have, you know, drying room even. So it's really useful, and it really helps me as a commuter. Otherwise I'd have to put on soaking wet clothes in the afternoon, or equally wear them all day, or that sort of thing. So there's definitely a level of comfort that needs addressing to turn it into a reality, especially when you live in the northwest of the UK where we get a lot of rainfall. So I think we need to sort of think about the experience of the cyclist and how that can be promoted through the workplace, and through perhaps also our mindset, you know, that actually it's okay to get wet, it's okay to get changed, and that's kind of a new normal. I don't know.
that? Yeah, there's some quite different things, aren't there, about being able to get changed and stuff if you've got wet in the rain or something, and that's different if it's a leisure ride to if you're cycling somewhere where you've then got to do stuff. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I can say something. Well, as I mentioned before, infrastructure, you know, is probably the number one thing. But here in Spokes, we did quite an interesting kind of semi-experiment a couple of years ago. We ran an annual competition, and the competition a couple of years ago was what inspired you to start using your bike for everyday journeys, or whether you were an existing leisure cyclist or whether you were a novice. And the number one response by far was that you were persuaded by friends and relations. So it could be, you know, your grandfather or your partner, but this seemed to be what inspired a very large number of people to start cycling. So there's a need for a kind of wide community-based approach to try and make it a more normal, you know, make it a more normal thing, and encourage people to talk to their children or their aunts or uncles or whatever, and show that this is quite normal. And what has helped an awful lot as well, which again came through in our competition, is the arrival of e-bikes, because there's a whole generation, I'm talking about an older generation here, a whole generation of people who have stopped cycling or who are now able to start doing that. In Edinburgh Council, for example, the convener of transports is a lady who herself, she calls herself a slightly overweight, slightly over middle-aged lady who has pain problems. She, you know, this is how she expresses herself in public, and yet she bought a bike. She lives several miles from council offices up a very, very long, steep hill. She now cycle commutes every day. And there are lots of examples of that in Edinburgh. So I think e-bikes are definitely a help for a whole new category of people coming into cycling.
Thank you. Yeah, very encouraging. Andreas, I think you were going to come in.
Yes. So I just wanted to add that in a kind of more general sense, I think in order for someone to become a cyclist in general, or go from being a leisure cyclist to a commuting cyclist, in very general terms, I think we need to make cycling more convenient, or equally as convenient as using the car. So if people are giving the choice, and if those choices are actually viable and sustainable long term, then I think people will start to consider, for example, petrol costs, parking costs, etc., etc. If, as Nigel said, if they have the facilities, for example, where they work to park their bicycle easily, and have a shower, all of that, then people will gravitate towards that. And of course, not everyone can do that, and it's not even desirable for everyone to do that. But more people on bikes means more space on roads, so it works best for everyone.
Emphasizing the benefits for everyone is important.
That's an interesting thing that you just said, Andreas. More people on bikes means more space on roads. I guess some drivers would disagree with that.
Definitely.
Cyclists and cars are put in the same space, and they're not compatible, very compatible, and therefore there's a challenge with that. And I often wonder sometimes when people are hooting at me to get out of the way, I'm thinking, well, I'm saving some space, but I'm actually slowing you down. So there's a kind of irony there, isn't there? That's part of that challenge.
Yeah, definitely.
Margot, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I think a lot of very interesting points have been made. I was thinking about what Dave said about having relatives who can support you in getting started with cycling or continuing, and I think it all raised it's an interesting point because I believe these COVID policies and the overall situation created some kind of triggered some kind of a threshold. We passed a threshold, I believe, in some cities, and I'm in Paris right now, and it's insane what happened with Paris. The number of cyclists who are on the roads right now in this city, and I believe we have all of these phenomena of self-maintaining progress, where more and more people cycle, so more and more people know people who cycle. The streets are safer. Safety by numbers is starting to be a very well-known thing. And from my side, which is the bike industry, well, it's also growing, and bike workshops are increasingly being known and developing. And I would like to acknowledge the very interesting conversation that's happening in the comments about bike frames and sizing, and as we get away from cycling equals sport and cycling equals leisure, and we get more towards cycling as a utility and cycling for transport, we may get to a more diverse array of frames, equipment, and things that are really made for the everyday person, not just the sporty cyclist, etc. So yeah, I think there are lots of ways this development can occur, but we're quite in a good situation right now. I'm pretty optimistic about that.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for picking up that thread from the comments as well. That's really interesting, and clearly a challenge. Just picking up, Dan. By the way, do please keep the questions coming. There's another comment thread around the leisure and utility relationship. I think there's a really important point being made that we shouldn't expect that people have to change clothes after they've commuted. I think there's a broader point that if people have got kind of used to doing cycling for leisure or recreation, have got kind of used to putting on loose clothes or something for that, loose fitting clothes, then they may have an expectation that changing clothes is something they need to do. So it may be about expectations and perceptions as much as the reality of it. Although I think it's nice to have the option as well if you do a really long commute. That's my personal view anyway. So picking up some other questions. Patrick mentions that there seems to be a bit of a backlash with the temporary cycle lanes during COVID-19 on the A56, etc., which is referring to some in Greater Manchester. Sorry, actually, it isn't phrased as a question, but I think there's a question in there. Is that what can we do about this? How can we address that there's going to be a backlash? That we've already alluded to. It's likely that some people may not want these extra facilities for cycling. It may be a perception that they're actually taking space away from cars, not making more room for everyone. How do we address that?
Well, in Edinburgh, there has certainly been some backlash. To remember is that the majority of schemes in Edinburgh seems to be pretty. I mean, the few schemes where there's definite, very strong are a minority, and we've got several now.
Dave, I'm really sorry.
Which are
cutting in and out again.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything you changed before, but it worked perfectly before.
No, I've not changed anything. Sorry.
Okay. Well, it seems okay.
Do you want to go on to somebody else? Then?
No, please try again. It seems okay at the moment. It may just be temporary things.
Okay, I've been sorry. Yeah, I'm just saying that in Edinburgh, there's a large number of schemes have now been implemented, and there is severe backlash against a few of them, but the majority have gone in and are being used and are welcomed. So I think it's possible to kind of overestimate how much backlash there is. I think where there has been backlash, the complaints have mainly been about lack of consultation. But of course, a lot of people use consultation as an excuse because they really don't want it to happen at all. But in our paper, we suggest a way of having an element of consultation, but not allowing it to kind of take years and years as it has done in the past. So it's kind of combining a modest level of consultation with a try then modify approach. And I think that's possibly the way forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so some consultation, but keeping it more modest. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
There's some roadworks on a major road into the Lake District just about to occur that will take over 3 months to get sorted. Sorry, my phone just went off. And I guess that's a major inconvenience to all road users, and you know, not everybody's going to be happy about that. So I guess these sort of temporary changes, I don't have the same experience because I don't live in a city, so I'm probably speaking out of turn somewhat, could be viewed as something down the road is going to be better than this, you know. So there has to be a temporary thing has to lead to a more permanent solution that is a solution that works for all users as best can be. I can't offer exactly what those solutions are, but temporary can't be just it's a temporary fix and then it goes away. So I guess the challenge of temporary is putting something more permanent in place post temporary. It's just a comment really, but I was just thinking in terms of the roadworks, people will accept roadworks, they'll grumble about them, they won't like them, but it is a kind of reality of having to keep the road up to standard, etc. I wondered if there's a sort of parallel there. That's my point, I guess.
Great, thanks. Any other points before we get to some other questions? Yeah, Andreas.
Yeah, if I may, I think there are 2 points to be made there. One is much what Nigel and Dave have said. So one is flexibility. So I think there needs to be a high level of flexibility when something is implemented, and especially in these days where things have not taken the kind of traditional route into being delivered. I think that there should be some flexibility based on the reaction from, especially from the people who actually use the space. Another point to be made, though, is to not fall into the trap to assume that there will be backlash in every single thing we do. So another very interesting lesson that we took from Ghent, and this is something that I don't think I mentioned in my contribution, is that the council, after the day that they had kind of made all the changes to the city, the council had set like a control room where they would monitor the city for 2 weeks just to see, you know, what the backlash is, where there are some conflicts that would need to be resolved. And what they found out, they took this quite seriously, and what they found out was that beyond just a few kind of grants here and there, someone driving down the road and realizing that it doesn't quite work that way anymore, there wasn't any actual significant backlash that needed to be addressed. Not saying that this is the case for everything, just saying that we shouldn't assume that there will be significant backlash.
Mm. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so we might kind of anticipate how we might react to it, but we shouldn't stop doing stuff just because we think there might be a backlash.
exactly.
Yeah.
Could I just add one other point? What we tend to forget is that where we get the backlash, it's often because something is happening very suddenly. People aren't expecting it, and it's suddenly changing all their patterns. What we tend to forget is that there has been a long process which is continuing of change through non-consultation. This is people buying more cars, and currently people buying bigger cars. And so roads which were suitable for walking and cycling for everybody basically gradually became roads on which you wouldn't walk, you wouldn't cycle, you wouldn't send your kids out. So there's been this long process continuing of non-consultation, but there's never a kind of, you know, hot point where everybody suddenly realizes it's happening. And that's kind of the opposite to what we're getting now, with where we do get backlash, where it's because it's something sudden, it's very obvious it's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this one before we move on?
I saw a good point in the chat I thought was interesting, which is to perhaps be proactive about promoting the benefits of these temporary bike lanes more, and to try and get that message across more, so that there's a positive message out there. There will inevitably be this sort of message in the press about conflicts, because they love a sort of good argument, but actually to put out the positive seems to be an opportunity.
Thanks. So I'm just, as I'm sure you all are as well, just looking through all the comments and questions. So it's quite an interesting experience, really, because there's clearly discussion going on in the chat box in a way that couldn't happen at a normal or an in-person conference, which is really interesting. So I'm just going to pick up. We've got about a quarter of an hour left. So I didn't ask people to read questions out before because I was watching just issues with sound and stuff, but I think we'll try it. So if I could invite, and don't feel you have to do this, but if I could invite Matali Kadia to read your question out, I think you can just turn your microphone on and then you'll be able to speak to us if you'd like to.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Ah, perfect. Right. So my question was because I've been like I'm like an interested but concerned cyclist, and I've been cycling quite often in Melbourne. And because of the COVID situation, what I've kind of noticed eventually is because there's so much of a conflict that has started rising between the walkers, runners, and the cyclists, because recreational cycling has all of a sudden increased. So, and roads are still not very safe because the traffic is low, so the speeds are still high. So, what do you think of this conflict? How can that conflict be resolved between cyclists and runners in terms of how COVID has taken over the recreational cycling more than the commuter cycling? So, I just wanted to know, what do you think about that?
Thank you very much.
Okay, I can say something on that. That is a problem in Edinburgh. In particular, the worst example is we've got a very narrow canal towpath, which is very, very heavily used by walkers and cyclists. And there's a fair bit of conflicts on that, especially in commuting times, but throughout 24/7 almost, really. So when Edinburgh Council has been deciding which which COVID street schemes to introduce, they've used a lot of factors in deciding which projects to go ahead with, because obviously there are hundreds of streets and they could implement these. They've got to have priorities. So one of the criteria they've come up with is where a scheme would provide an alternative to a very heavily used active travel route. So although they haven't implemented this yet, one of their priorities is an on-road segregated cycle route parallel to the canal towpath, with the idea that that's going to reduce the pressures on the towpath. So we're hoping that scheme goes ahead soon. But anyway, that's one solution. In some places, look for alternative routes to reduce the pressure on heavily used routes. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may comment
Yeah.
as well, first of all, I want to thank Mitali for her question, because I find it very relevant now. I think what we have found throughout decades of cycling policy or kind of cycling related discussion is that cyclists and pedestrians are being kind of grouped together, and that's unfair to both groups, because even within one activity itself, you see you have walkers and you have runners, you have leisure cyclists, you have commuter cyclists, you have someone who just picked up the bike on and it's their very first day. So there are a lot of needs that need to be addressed. Now, how we actually respond to these needs, I'm afraid I don't quite have an answer yet. However, I feel like it's very important to speak up about these new needs, because change doesn't only come from top down. Change can actually, and I think it most ideally starts from the ground up, starts from the users themselves. So if enough people speak up about their own personal needs, because everyone's needs are worth discussing, then this will pick up by the kind of upper tiers of governance, and hopefully we will come to a point where we actually do have the solution for these kind of new emerging needs and problems.
Thank you. Nigel or Margot, would you like to add anything?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I got two thoughts on this. One is that I work in the Lake District, and a big conflict is mountain biking and cycling, because of the various different speeds and the thrill of mountain biking compared to walking, and that's a perennial problem. I also have experience being in places like Holland, where people are just are walking and cycling amongst each other, and it was really interesting to see that bell and simple things on your bike are kind of really key. And I don't understand the dynamic because I don't live there, but it kind of worked, so you could hear behind you somebody ringing a bell, and then you would realize there's a bike coming at quite some speed, and they seem to be accepting of that. But also have a much better infrastructure for cycling and walking. It's much wider and there's much more space. And I understood what Dave said about pinch points. Pinch points are probably where there's problems, or in mountain biking in the Lake District, it's about the downhill sections. It's a problem, isn't it? Wherever you have people, you have conflicts. I think if you just had cyclists on a cycleway, you'd still have some conflicts because it involves people. People have different ideas, as Andreas was saying, about what they want to use that space for, and that's going to create different conflicts. If somebody's trying to run a PB and somebody else is just out to sort of just leisurely move from one space to another, then they've obviously got completely different priorities. So it's always going to be a problem, but I guess it's identifying the real problem places and trying solutions that might not work. I guess I don't have a lot to say on any particulars there. Just some thoughts.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, there's a lot of differences between people cycling and people walking, like within those groups, aren't there? Let alone between the two groups. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? No. Well,
Sorry, I've been a bit quiet, but it's just because my expertise is more on the bike industry, so I'm not sure I would be very relevant here.
Sure. I thought the question of the bike industry has been popping up actually in the discussion, hasn't it? The design of bikes and the suitability for all people. I think it's an important point, important context. Andrea, were you going to add something, or shall I move on?
I just wanted to point out a comment that I just saw now, saying that there is quite a focus on cycling and pedestrian kind of conflict. However, that isn't so much a problem as the pedestrian car conflict. So it's just I think it's quite a good message to keep our eye as professionals, to keep our eyes on the ball and kind of see the bigger picture sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this issue of bike design and cycle lane design has been coming up quite a lot in discussion. I'd like to invite Mauricio to ask their question if they would like to. If they'd like to turn the microphone on and ask a question. He's Give that a moment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Okay, yeah. So I'm researching, the impact that these pop-up lanes are having in different cities, and one of the things that I tend to find often in reading comments, whether it's here in Europe or in Latin America or in the U.S., is this idea that these pop-up cycle lanes do not take into consideration, people with mobility impairment. So how can governments, respond to this backlash, if you want to call it that? When governments assure the people that, in fact, these lanes can also be used by people with these impairments.
Yeah, thank you. So that would be a really important point in terms of continuing to include a wider population in cycling as traffic levels rise. Any thoughts on this?
If I may comment on this, I think what we may come to find as a solution for this kind of conundrum is that more space actually solves these issues. So at this moment in time, all these conflicts occur because everyone besides motorized traffic need to share kind of very narrow spaces in our kind of streetscapes. However, as we increase the space available for all these kind of different uses, I think we may come to find that this isn't so much a problem as it previously were. So our job is not done because some pop-up cycle lanes have been delivered. That's just the start. Like, we have quite a lot of work ahead of us in order to kind of achieve our holistic vision.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think there's a broader point about people who cannot cycle. That may be dependent on bike design as well, though. It may be that they cannot cycle on conventional bikes, but there may be other forms of cycling that are available to them. Yeah, I'd like to just invite the other panelists if there's any further points on that.
Yes, I'd agree with you that first of all, if we make new lanes, it is likely to reduce conflicts in some ways and take away some of the conflicts from the sidewalk. I mean, this is what some bike lanes have been doing in Lyon, just putting the cyclists in a dedicated space instead of the conflict spaces of the sidewalk. But besides, what lots of the arguments overlook is that many people don't cycle because they don't have safe spaces. And one good example, and I forgot the name of the author of this paper, but there was a very good paper about disabled cyclists and how actually cycling can be very helpful for some disabled people who would not be able to walk otherwise. So if someone remembers the reference of this paper, I'd be happy to see it in the comments, for instance, because it's been quite noticed when it came out. But some people say, oh, what about disabled people? And actually many of them are actually safer when cycling, which is something we don't say enough, I believe.
That's a very valuable point, yes. We're getting close to the end of this session, what I'd like to do is invite the panelists to just wrap up, really, just like maybe a minute or so. And I know there's a lot to take in with the discussion. The discussion is great, by the way. Thanks everyone for contributing to that. Maybe picking up on what we've discussed, but also some of the themes that are coming up in the discussion. One, for example, is whether we should be referring to mobility lanes rather than cycle lanes in our discussion. And I think there's probably some important lessons around terminology as well, generally. And what we call ourselves and what we call policies and infrastructure. So yeah, really just a chance to sum up. I'm aware Nigel didn't speak on the last question, I think, so if we start with you.
Okay, I thought it was some interesting points about clothing and sort of accessibility of cycling, that you don't need all the kit and that you don't necessarily need to get changed to work. I take that point on, and that bikes themselves also don't need to be super light and expensive. They can be very pragmatic, don't need millions of gears necessarily, depends on the location you're in. So I suppose it's that sort of inclusivity aspect that I was interested when I was reading the comments. I was thinking that perhaps hasn't got so much voice in this conversation. So I was just wanted to put it out there that I think they're all good points. And I always say to my son, who's a keen cyclist, you don't need to put all your kit on just to go to the shops, you know, and try and encourage him just to wear his jeans and etc.
Good. Thank you. Would anyone else like to pick up on any of the points in the discussion?
Well, just
after you, Dave.
Okay, just to finish then, thanks very much, Graham. When I first saw the different topics under this theme, I couldn't imagine how you could fit them all together, but somehow you managed to do it. I think that what's really come through to me is, if you think back to a year ago, here in Edinburgh, you know, the idea of a single segregated cycle lane being introduced was something absolutely major, or a road closure. You know, that's really one big thing we'd be fighting for. But suddenly this year, it's all happening. You know, incredible kilometers of segregated cycle road closures. It's phenomenal what's happened in just that year. So what we've got to do now is try and make these things permanent. And the approach of try, then modify, and build it at cheap cost, and then make it permanent later. Engage with councils and governments as far as possible to make this happen. And I think that's going to be the key to maintaining and increasing levels of cycling. So thank you very much to all the other presenters and yourself.
Thank you, Dave. Margot, would you like to start?
I think many very different things have been discussed, and I wouldn't be able to really wrap up. But I think a point that maybe should be discussed further in maybe in the remainder of this conference is the point of temporariness. I think that is a very crucial point of what about the new is to be continued, and what will we keep out of all this in a couple of years, in 5-6 years. But yeah, thank you everyone for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you. And Andreas, would you like to add anything to sum up your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So again, from me as well, thank you for hosting, and thank you for everyone for their etc. So one thing that comes to mind, just seeing all the questions and all the discussions in the comments, as well as the discussions between us, is a Greek word called Panagia. So Panagia means the solution to all problems, and I think it's quite evident just from the very different perspectives of everyone, and you know, all the different topics that come up, that there is no one solution, you know, that fits all when it comes to cycling and the new emerging needs. So the key here, I believe, is willingness, political willingness or otherwise, to address and engage with the problem, and flexibility, you know, not being rigid in our approach. And if we keep these two things in mind, I think we can take it step by step, and hopefully, you know, work towards achieving our vision.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a nice note to end on. That feels positive. So thank you very much for that. Thanks to everyone, the panelists, for the great presentations and for engaging so thoughtfully and imaginatively today, and linking with all the discussions. And thanks for all the inputs into the chat window, which is still scrolling away, I can see. So that's brilliant. I'm just going to put the slide up again so we can just remind ourselves about what's coming next. So next session is at, I wish we could say that we're all having a tea break together, but we can have individual tea breaks, and then all meet again at 11:30 for policies to boost cycling. It's been pointed out that the web address on this slide is wrong. We are international, not UK, so it should be just .org. There is no .uk on the website address. We'll change that for the next one. I'll leave this session open for a bit, because then you can continue in the chat window and you can kind of take down any links and stuff that you want to take away. And yeah, also just to mention the Zoom social this evening, more details will follow about that. A link will be sent around on Eventbrite, so just keep an eye out for that. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists and thanks to all of you. And see you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.